When you think of the term innovation, what do you connect it to? I think a lot of times, and this is something that I've been really kind of trying to work on in the work that I do, is really not connecting innovation to the idea of technology. A lot of people will look at, like, hey, we're going to be innovative organizations, and basically they make their director of technology the director of innovation, which actually sends a message that innovation equals technology. And I actually totally disagree with that. To me, innovation is about doing new and better things. And when you think about where we need innovation right now, especially in education, is with what we do with our mental health practices and looking at how do we create new and better ways to support our staff who are supporting our students while they're dealing with trauma, while they're dealing with, mental health crisis, for a lack of a better term, that we are having in education right now. And it's one of the reasons I really love talking to Ewane Masango, who asked me to refer to him as E in the podcast. We had a really great conversation connecting innovation and health and why that's so important. But we also talked about how storytelling is really fuel to innovation, that when we share our stories, when we actually help people see themselves in the story and help them share their own, that's where we really can get people moving forward in many avenues, not only with health initiatives, but what we do in the classroom every single day. It was a really enjoyable conversation. I love connecting with you. I know you're going to enjoy it. Welcome back to another episode of the Innovator's Mindset Podcast. Hey everyone, this is George Couros. Welcome back to another episode of the Innovator's Mindset Podcast. I have a very special guest today. His name is Ewane Masango, and he goes by E. So I asked him if that's okay if I call him E, but I'm really excited to talk to you. We were having a great conversation before we started recording, and maybe we'll get into some stuff. Maybe we won't. Who knows? It's like he lives in he's in Queens, New York, so I had to ask about the Knicks. So just because they're doing really well, and I always turn everything to basketball, no matter what I talk about and with whoever I talk about. So E, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. Thanks for connecting with me. I'm really excited to learn kind of more about your work, more about what you do. So can you kind of just tell people who you are, what you do today, and kind of how you got to that point?
Well, what led me here to George and everyone who's going to be listening is probably a lot. It has to do with basketball. So I didn't even know you were that big of a person. But I look at basketball as poetry in motion. So for my life, I definitely have always looked at a lot of things and balanced it with basketball. So let me give an example. So if I look at how I generally approach life, even the project that I'm working on now, which overall we're really just looking to do what a lot of people are looking to do, which is how do we help, heal the world? How do we create new systems and innovate new systems on the systems that we currently have, all the way down to the governmental level, especially from a mindset standpoint. And I look at that as in basketball, if you're the star player of any team, right? Like if you don't really go into the game with a game plan, the entire defense is based off of you. Right. So you just have to literally live off of instinct. Every play, you have a system of progressions, as a quarterback that you're going through, and you just read and react off of that. And the ability to be able to do that and trust that flow is what brought me here.
Well, so that's really interesting, because I a lot of times I talk about innovation, and there's kind of this push and pull about the notion of innovation that knowledge is not important, but you actually have to, it's always about kind of doing the new thing. It's always creating new stuff. And what I actually feel is knowledge is so crucial to the notion of innovation that when you actually know the stuff that you're doing really well, just like you said, then you can actually start kind of changing things on the fly. And I always actually talk about the notion of jazz musicians, right? Jazz musicians are actually, known for their ability to improvise on the spot, but it's not like they just picked up a trump and just start doing weird stuff, right? They know their stuff inside out, right? And so that is, I love that analogy, because I think it is actually fundamentally based on actually having a real in-depth knowledge of what you're doing, the work that you're doing, but actually being able to build on, and as you said, kind of building on that instinct. And you kind of said you're doing stuff in the health field, right? Sure. So like how do you see kind of innovation as a connection to that? And like, what are some of the work that you're doing in that space?
Well, one of them. So when we talk about mental health, I look at mental health as something where you look at, again, being an athlete, like being fully present, meaning that you're understanding like certain patterns and synchronicities like are happening. As an example, you heard it here first. What you just said about jazz, I'm literally currently learning right now. Again, this is nothing we've talked about.
Right.
I'm actually in here in New York learning like classical, like musicians for the same reasons. I was kind of wanting to figure out innovatively, like how would I put together health and fun or entertainment, right? And I was like, well, I'm studying Disney and the Imagineers and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, it's really like the sounds, man. Like if you can get the sound and understand how to make things sound a certain type of way, whether it be musically, movically, cinematically, I guess, right. And so on and so forth. So I literally was just watching a video on jazz maybe an hour ago about like modes and how you basically can play with, and I was going through that same mentality of how would you be able to build something that's sustainable if you didn't have a base level of knowledge of at least of the structure. I think that after you know the structure, you can bend and play with it. So I would say that, and then overall in regards to health, that's just an example of how I associate like something in regards to like mental health and awareness on the positive end. Same thing with like emotional health. It has to do with me like how to find a synergy between food that I absolutely love and food that makes me feel alive. Right. Which is like a constant, like innovative thing, because depending on what city I'm in, I'm always moving around. So depending on what city I'm in, I was in Brooklyn before. It's completely different options that I had when I got here to Flushing, Queens, and then it was like different options in LA and some other places that that this journey has led me. So I would say that kind of on the emotional level. On the physical level, it's kind of this balance for me between like vitality and feeling my best, as well as like flexibility, like understanding that like physical flexibility somewhat is associated with other forms of flexibility, and understanding that like things are supposed to kind of come and go. And again, back to basketball, somebody like LeBron playing 20 something years and still dunking. Well, early on, the story is that Chris Bosh and a lot of the other players were like they were like a training camp or whatever over the summer. And they're just like, why does LeBron have like this person stretching him all the time? Like, this is just weird. Like, it just seems like doing too much. But then you see what happens over time. And so definitely have a longevity approach.
Okay. So I do everything not to talk basketball because I could just get into it the whole time. Right. So like, I'm like, I could talk basketball all day. I got to ask you this question. Who's better, LeBron or Jordan? Who's your guy?
Okay. Well, this is actually a discussion I've been having over the I think maybe even the last day. I mean, I am somewhat in a lot of different ways connected to Jordan, starting with we're in the same like fraternity. We know like some similar people. In North Carolina, there's like some deep connections I have there. So I mean, I would say overall that Jordan is I'm favoring in most situations. Yet the last week specifically, as it was wild that you asked that, is that I've been looking at LeBron's career and I'm just like, man, but there's something to also like not having a mindset and then developing it over time that says something to whoever came in his life at the right time, at the right point, the right thing. And you just see how that type of diligence and attention to detail clearly played out over a longer period of time than anyone has, as of thus far. So, carrying that mantle of being, the player in the league that most people are looking for, I feel as though he's done an exceptional job.
So you're saying Jordan, though? That's what I'm taking. Right?
Yeah, that's what you're taking. That's what you're. I mean, if I'm going to be pulled my teeth pulled or whatever the conversation is.
LeBron, I actually think so. I think LeBron over time, and it's interesting, right? Like I think Jordan was the better basketball player, right? LeBron's probably the better athlete of the two. That's one of it. But also LeBron over, like, he's had a longer career of being amazing, right? Where Jordan actually, he took some time off kind of things. He didn't, play as long, even though he probably actually did play as long, but he took those years off in between. But it's interesting because one of the reasons that LeBron is so good for such a long period of time is his focus on health. Like, he actually, it's like said, he spends about $1 million on, and like, he has the money to do that, right? Like, not everyone listening to this has $1 million to spend on their health, right? But like, he spends $1 million a year just on his training, right? Like, just on like his, his trainers and things like that too, right? So it's one of the reasons he's actually, connected, done so well for so long, right? Because he's They, I could dunk when I was like 22. But that ain't happening anymore, right? Like, and he's, I'm only a few years old, like, well, I guess about 10 years older than him, but he's like just crazy. So a lot of the people listening to this right now are in the field of education. That's why I don't always talk basketball, because I think they hate it. But anyways, I love talking about it. So a lot of people listen to this in the field of education, and one of the things that they are, struggling with probably tremendously is not only probably the mental health of kids and emotional health too, right? As you kind of talked about, but also kind of taking that on themselves and feeling kind of really overwhelmed, with a lot of the work that's happening, I think a lot of times you kind of talked about, innovation in government. There's a lot of times that, in trying to protect, everybody, there's all these initiatives and all these extra things that are kind of piled on that are actually causing like more stress. Right. And I hear it over and over again. So, like, what is some advice that you kind of, maybe from your experience, some of the work that you actually do, really, that you could kind of maybe help, maybe educators, maybe first with themselves? Because I'm kind of big advocate that you can't really take care of other people unless you're okay, right? And maybe actually how they might help their students.
Right. Well, I mean, just not belaboring basketball, but Phil Jackson always said, it still starts with the fundamentals, right? So, example that everyone knows: you get on a plane, you get, the plane's going down. Oh, you put the mask on your family member first, or your child first, or your your parent first, right? Well, no, obviously you have to put it on yourself first. So overall, I like to just keep that fundamental, because often, especially as educators, I consider myself to be someone that loves teaching and talking to people about stories. And so I have to always put that into context, because otherwise, end up burning out. In a sense, I guess we get back up, but you burn out for a little bit. And so overall, I think it just gets down to looking at anything as investments. And so to piggyback up what you were saying about the LeBron few million thing, one model that we created and that I'm figuring out ways to create business models around is the idea of relative amounts of, discretionary income that you stake for the improvement of your health. Right? Because it really depends on the person and what they're doing. But as long as it's catered to that person, there's always relative things that someone can be doing to improve every single month, or whatever their budget is, if it's every 2 weeks, if it's every, however so often. And so that's really the thing I always say, is that I just at some point came across enough mentorship where I looked at what LeBron did, and I was like, okay, how can I do that on a smaller scale, right? Where it's like, it's just a mentality. Okay, there's these options on this menu. Okay, I definitely want this more, but I probably want this more because they wanted me to want this more. Like, which one is going to allow me to do what's on my calendar for the rest of the day, or whichever thing I had, whatever. It's like, okay, well then let me do this one. Then I realized that's not necessarily sustainable, because if it's not something that you like, so you have to, like I said, it's just about playing with it, being patient with ourselves. And that goes with the whole health thing also. It's really just kind of understanding that if we actually consider things, most times we've been in a bind, somehow the right thing just kind of happens at the right time. So how do we stay in that zone? Again, back to basketball, but just to be all the way honest, from the back end, you can tell that someone like Jordan, as a teacher or as anything else, which comes with being a leader in any sport, but let's say especially in basketball, because it's a team sport, the way he taught and the way that he led, it was kind of like often very delegatory, right? Because a lot of times, a lot of us who are educators, or teach, not to disrespect anyone who's formally educating, that it's like I need to do it all myself thing, as opposed to just kind of let the game play out how it's playing out. Some people's hot, they're hot tonight, this person, but what you do know is that by the time the game is over, you paid enough attention to what's going on to where now you can put in your expertise and be okay with it getting to that point. Otherwise, it's not, like I said, it's not really sustainable, because then not only have we drained ourselves, but other people have also not been empowered to be able to step up, which is why I love education, because it's almost always a win-win. It's not like people go around like, man, I hate these teachers. People mostly hate like bosses and things of that nature as they get older, right? Like most people who taught them anything, people don't have like strong feelings towards. So I think educators win off of that though.
Yeah, I actually, I don't know if you know this about me, because we just met today. And kind of you're talking about health, but I actually lost 110 pounds basically since COVID started, right? And right, yeah, I know.
Well, why are you ordering all the shoes? There's just like shoes and weight coming off.
Right. Well, it's actually the reason I bought shoes, because we were talking about this before we got on the podcast. I started just buying shoes because I knew that even if I continue to lose weight, the shoes would actually fit. Where I was actually buying clothes, I bought a bunch of clothes I never wore. I actually tried them on, they fit that day. A month later, they were too big. So I was like, okay, just stick with shoes for a little bit. You can do that. And then, when you get to a weight you're happy with, then maybe then you start buying some clothes, right? But actually, kind of talking about, some of the innovation and the connection to what you're actually doing. I had tried, I've been it wasn't like I just decided one day to lose weight and then I started losing weight. I had been struggling with this for years and years. And so I actually, would try this program, right? And see how it goes. And it was like, hey, okay, I picked up some things, but didn't help me achieve what I was trying to achieve. And I actually, tried this thing, same thing, helped me with some stuff, didn't get me to achieve what I do. And then basically something kind of clicked. And I think part of it too is, I have kids. When you're looking at COVID, the number one comorbidity is actually obesity. And I was like, look, I'm not in a good place. If I get COVID, I'm in trouble, right? Basically, based on what the science and the data was actually sharing. So that kind of kicked it into gear. But what happened was all of those things, kind of going back to the notion of the jazz musician, all of those things that I picked up in those different programs, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, I actually put into what works for me. And, I think a lot of times people will say like, hey, how did you do it? And I'm like, well, I can tell you what I did, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you, because there's certain things that you have to kind of figure out for yourself, right? Like, I don't know. I actually, when you talked about food, and I don't know what you think about this, I literally eat the same thing every day, 6 days of the week. And I stick to it at the same time. And and it's food that I really love, but is also healthy. And it's kind of like what you said, sometimes you eat really well, but it doesn't give you life, right? It does the opposite, right? Like it makes you feel crappy. And then I'll have one night a week where I eat really terrible and stuff that I love, but makes me feel like crap. And I feel so crappy the next day that I'm like, ugh, I don't want that for a while. And then by the time, day 7 rolls around, I'm like, yeah, I could do that again. Cause I kind of forget, but I actually, before, the way I was eating, the way I was actually taking care of my health, I actually didn't realize that I was, kind of, as you said, I was just basically drained of life, but it was so normal to me. I didn't even realize it. Do you know what I mean? I felt grow. I don't know what you think about that. And that, I had to figure out those things for myself, where some people could not eat the same thing every single day. And still, they'd find their own pathway. It's just like, I like this. I'm good. These are foods I really enjoy to eat, and they're healthy. So that's kind of, so I don't know if what you think of that process, but yeah, it worked for me. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, let me just say this respectfully. I'm assuming that you're the expert. I was actually just going to ask you, because I mean, I would assume that if you're looking to innovate anything, at least the stuff that I've read, more than the innovator's mindset, like innovator's dilemma and a few of these other, these other similar concepts. It's like, okay, so if I don't set an intention, and then measure it, over time, it's hard to be able to really call it an innovation. So I would actually say that in general sense, I think that anyone would be looking at innovation as, no matter if you're an educator or just any kind of person, in every part of their life. So you're like, okay, like my intention is to, like you said, this is also another, just a quick side note and get back on it, is that often if we do embrace both sides of it, I don't want to get too deep into the whole like dark and light thing. It's all subjective, but the idea of going through the dark side of anything, right? Like the fear thing, a lot of times it's much more, it's kind of like a mentor once told me, it's like, if you tell somebody to leave their house because maybe even like their favorite girl or something like that is outside, right? And they're watching their, a game. They might be like, all right, you're joking, get out there. I'll get out there in a minute. You might be messing with me. But if your house is on fire, like you are running out of this place regardless of how you feel at that moment. So there's a way to healthily be able to, capture that. And like you said, a lot of people, I haven't been blessed with kids yet myself, but I do have a lot of younger siblings and cousins. And I've noticed that there's definitely something to going through the idea of the fear of losing or disappointing or whatever kinds of people, as long as you're able to emotionally handle it, like losing a basketball game, which happens a lot of the season. I don't think a lot of people get that, which is why the playoffs is really when it matters. But anyway, the point is that if you're able to deal with the potential loss and kind of imagine in the mind without letting it take us over, well, then you're like, oh, well, you know what? I actually would want to be, better and do whatever it takes. And so at that point, the imagination, innovative mind opens up, and there the solutions are, and then we just start walking in that direction. But as far as doing the same thing every day, honestly, I don't know if that works for everybody, but it definitely works for me. So we're kindred spirits in that aspect. Like if my mom used to be so mad, she'd be like, "Oh, you're just eating the same thing every day." Listen, Mom, like this is what works for me right now, right? Like it's very regimented. I like the way it tastes. It works, and so as much as possible, I do try to do that, which is I think as long as you have something, like I said, that really does cover a lot of bases, I think a lot of people would be surprised that they wouldn't mind it either. It's just that a lot of the times we're not necessarily covering all those things. And so even if it's something that you really like, it's not sustainable. So you don't eat that all the time. Or if it's something that's really good for you, whether you don't really like it, you don't eat it all the time. But if it's something that's both, like you were able to figure out, like I have at times, it's just like, why wouldn't I just eat the same? It's just like, unless I'm eating out with somebody, like I don't understand, like why we wouldn't just keep giving ourselves that fuel. And you looking at food and some of these things as more like fuel in a vehicle is another thing that has really helped me.
Well, there's a couple of things. I don't know if you've ever heard this analogy, but I saw someone say this, and I have 2 dogs, and they're like, they said I eat like a dog, and they're like, what does that mean? They're like, well, think about dogs. Most dogs eat at the same time, the same thing every single day, and that's why they're like, so fit. And I was like, kind of makes sense, right? That's kind of a weird analogy. So I kind of embrace that. But you made a really important point. When I was like, hey, I was actually always working out, but my eating habits were terrible. I'm like, I've got to fix that. This is the issue, right? So I would like eat salads every day because, salads are supposed to be healthy. And if anyone listens to this podcast, they know I hate salad. I just hate eating salad. So I'd eat it and I'd just be mad the entire time. I'd be like, stupid salad, right? And I'd be like swearing while I was eating. And I was like, and so I actually just started like, so the thing that I switched from this, and you alluded to this, is that when I started, I was eating healthy food that I thought would help me, and whether I liked it or not. And then I actually switched it up to finding food I like that was healthy. And then that actually made it way easier, right? Because it was like, and then you kind of can see those measures like, hey, if I eat this the whole week, how does it actually affect my mood? How does it actually affect my, if I'm trying to lose weight, is it actually helping in that process? And then you start finding, and I think one of the shifts is I see it more, like I'm Greek. We grew up in a restaurant. My parents own a restaurant. So like food was like a big celebration thing, which is probably not, didn't develop the best habits for me as a kid. And so, then I started kind of seeing like, hey, this is fuel to the things that I'm trying to do. And sometimes the way I'm eating actually depletes me, in the way that I actually connect. So that was like that, a lot of shifts for me in that too. And now I feel like I'm doing, like, if I was still eating salad, I know that I would kind of fall off and go back, because I'm like, hey, I got to my weight, I'm done with the salads, right? Whereas I kind of see like, hey, I like eating this food. It's helped me get to where I'm at. I can actually maintain that and continue. So I appreciate that. So like you're backing up a lot of what I'm saying. So I really appreciate this. You actually have in your bio when we connected, you talk about kind of the art of storytelling and why that's really important. And one of the things I talked about in the Innovator's Mindset is I actually believe storytelling is the fuel for innovation. That when people actually hear stories and they connect to those ideas, then that's when they actually start seeing them. And one of the things I always tell people is that you're trying to get people to see themselves in the story, right? So like a lot of times people like will tell stories at a conference and like, yeah, I was climbing a mountain and then my arm got stuck and then I had to cut it off. And you're like, okay, well, that's amazing, but I'm not cutting my arm off, right? So I don't see myself in that space at all. I don't like, that's a really amazing story, but I don't necessarily see that, right? Whereas I think a lot of times, I think that kind of the everyday experience is some of the most compelling stories. So like when you look at storytelling and you connect it, how do you see storytelling and innovation connected in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, there's so much to say in what you said. I'm just going to stay and keep it to the question because the Greek thing sent me somewhere else. Actually, speaking of Europe, I was in Norway once. I actually ended up kind of getting lost on the way there, but it was like a public speaking like competition. It ended up the part of it that was educational ended up being all about storytelling. And the guy that was there was like this world-renowned speaker, Eric Ed Meads, is like, he's like just talking about how, if you guys actually, you millennials don't get it, he's actually Canadian. Now I think about it, he's Canadian. But he was just like, only this little part of history has even had, written everything. He's like, we've been telling stories for 99.9%. That was like his whole argument. And I was like, I need to fact check this, right? Like I'm running over here because I'm a millennial. I'm like, let me. It sounds cool, but I was like, do we know if that's the case, right? Like, and so I'm looking, I'm like, yeah, it seems to be pretty valid that, we've only probably had the ability to tell stories since completely before that. So overall, I would say that, yeah, that experience and others kind of really allowed me to understand that once we place ourselves in a story, it's kind of like even with sports. It's like sometimes it's hard to explain to someone like the feeling of like what was happening like as the situation happened, right? Because it's like if you don't have an art or an understanding of storytelling, I would say similar to what we were talking about with other structures, it might just come up as a jumbled amount of things. But as I kind of learned more in regards to storytelling, I was like, okay, things have like a general structure. Hence, Jordan kind of understanding storytelling and how he played the game. He played the game for moments. It's a very cerebral thing, but it's something I feel like, especially like we're talking about as people who are trying to teach or empower anyone, really looking at the situation from how do we get someone to believe in their own story? And I think it also starts with us believing in our own, owning that story, crafting it, seeing all the positives and the negatives and seeing like what overlays both of them, which is still like the soul of that person that just keeps on going. I mean, we're here, right? Like we can go back in our story and be like, man, I hated, this part of my upbringing. It's like, yeah, but I'm like here. And it's just like, yeah, but I hated this. So yeah, but you're here. It's like you can't like dominate this whole situation, but a great story is able to layer in how you would have gotten to be this, great or decent person that you are now, even if you're just an everyday person. Maybe an everyday person is a lot more amazing than we consider them to be if we tell the story a little bit in a new way. And we told the story in a new way, then the everyday person could be, each one could be a super person or a hero person in their own sense, because I mean, at least I haven't yet. I've been across the world a few times over, and I definitely have still never met a person who didn't have a whole lifetime full of just like something, right? Like mental battles with this, or their grandparents' legacy did this, or the culture they were living in. Like, there's just nobody who like walks through every day and just like, you know what, nothing bad's ever. I've never tripped. I've never stumbled.
Right.
And I saw some guy, trip the other day walking into the subway. You kind of have that, nobody's looking kind of thing. It's just like, man, everybody's done it, man. It's all good.
Well, I think that's really important, that when you're kind of talking about this is actually kind of looking, because I everything that I do in a day, I'm always looking for a story, whether it's something that I write in a blog post, write in a tweet, share on Instagram. Because I think a lot of times when we think of stories, we think of like, long tales, right? As opposed to like, a tweet can tell a story, right? And like a blog post, obviously, a video, TikTok, right? And a lot of those things, tell stories, but they actually are stories that are spread very, very quickly in a way that you couldn't imagine, even 10, 15 years ago. But it's actually getting people to kind of understand that a lot of times when I'm actually, talking about the notion of innovation and connection, I'm trying to get people to see themselves, in that story. And I was actually talking to a group of administrators. And so I asked them, like, what is innovation? Like, when you say the word innovation, what do you actually mean? Right. And so he gave some like definition that was like super long and, was very wordy and very hard to connect with. I'm like, no, that's too much. I'm like, innovation is doing new and better things. That's it. That's all it is. Right. And now, so when you make it, and you mentioned this at the beginning, when you take the complex and then you make it simple, then it's more likely people start seeing themselves in the story. So I'll actually talk about, because a lot of people think innovation equals like technology, right? And you said it earlier, really kind of innovating our systems, innovating kind of the way that we think, and really kind of thinking of new, better ways of doing these things. So, you have a teacher in grade 1 who actually, doesn't, who actually, never uses technology, is against it, but had a kid struggling with reading. And then they actually figure out a way to help that kid read. And I'll say that's innovation. You create a new and better pathway for that kid. And so now they start seeing themselves as the innovator. And then they're like, yeah, no, I actually do innovative things and then when they start seeing themselves in that story, that's when that power starts to happen. Right. And one of the things that I'm very adamant about when we talk about the definition of innovation being doing new and better things, it actually has to be better. And I'm curious your thoughts on this. It was actually connected to health. One of the things that we did in our schools was we wanted kids to eat healthier, right? And I wasn't leading this one, but I kind of saw it unfold. So we wanted kids to eat healthier. So we took the vending machine with all the junk food in it, the chips, the chocolate bars, all the other stuff. And then they said, you know what? Let's get kids eating healthier. Let's replace all that stuff with carrots and like celery sticks. And kids were at school. They're like, nah, I'm not interested. And then they actually just said, I'm going to 7-Eleven. Like the 7-Eleven's 2 blocks away. I'm going to walk there. Right. And then they're thinking, like I walk 2 blocks. So I'm not going to get the little bag of chips. I'm going to get the big bag of chips. Right. And I'm going to get the big, because it took me like I had to walk 4 blocks. Right. And we're in Canada, so it's in snow. So it's extra hard. So then actually that process of them doing something different actually led to worse behaviors, right? Like, and it's kind of thinking about that. So I'm curious, like that's something we saw is like, we're actually, we're just replacing it, patting ourselves on the back that we got healthy food in there, but nobody was eating it. Right. And so we're like, that didn't change the practice. Right. So like, what are your thoughts on that? Curious, kind of your intersection between innovation and health.
Yeah. So the simplest thing that came to me in regards to that was just looking at my own experience, you know, I mean, imagine when we were all children, you know, it's like, and I say this with all respect to my parents, they know it. But it's just like this idea of the difference between like showing something and telling somebody something, right? And so I feel like that's really the biggest thing. It's often we have to actually put ourselves in the shoes of the people themselves. Either as, you know, like those shows where like the boss goes undercover, or maybe like a group where you have an open discussion with the people themselves. It definitely is often that we miss some of those little things. Like, I mean, I just got into my 30s, and now I'm old already. Like my little cousin was like, "Oh,
don't say that, man.
You're too old." I was like, I looked at her, I was just like, I'm too old. Like when did that
right.
When did that happen? And so it's just like I had to be humble to understand that, okay, like if that is the case to certain groups of people, well, what does that mean? And so it was like, well, if I look at it from their perspective, they have like certain customs in the way that they do things, right? Like, so they might have been using that you know, vending machine. And then whenever you ask, you know, like I was like, oh, the vending machine is no longer has the stuff that makes them like commune with their people. Like, it's like, you know, sometimes people are like, oh, you know, we're Cheetos guys, right? They might have had like a conversation about it. They eat their Cheetos next to one another. And then you remove that and say, well, we're not celery guys. Like we never said we're celery guys. So let's go to 7-Eleven and get some Cheetos. And then once you get there, 7-Eleven has a different business model. They want you to get the biggest thing, the big gulp, the biggest whatever. So everything in there is encouraging you to get the biggest thing. So they just end up coming back with just huge bags, and everyone who was looking to help kind of just ends up being like, dang it. But like I said, to bring it back more grounded, that is why I'm saying like it's related to parenting a lot of the times, because it's like, oh, you know, go do this. And it's like, yeah, but you're not necessarily putting into context why they're doing it, right? They're doing it based off of DNA differences from a health standpoint. I mean, it's a whole generational gap. Like there's like a difference in how they look at everything, not just one thing or two things. And so you're trying to more implement something from the standpoint of habits rather than anything. And so I think the encouragement, all in all, encouragement of habits, starting with the story of inspiring people to want to improve their habits. And a lot of the times, I'll just end with this, is like, it has to do, got back to the mental health thing or spiritual health or emotional health, depending on how you look at it. We can't consider ourselves so limited that we can't even change a little bit. Like, I mean, you may not want to change a lot, but like you can't change a little bit. Like you can't even just say that, okay, I'm happy I improved 1% this year or this today or whatever. Most people just think that they're always on this, you know, downslide in regards to especially a lot of things health, as opposed to really just kind of considering the entire thing a process.
Yeah, it's maybe I get in trouble for saying this, but I can't stand, maybe this is kind of what you said, I can't stand the "you're perfect the way you are" like tweets and Instagram, because I'm like, no, you're not, and neither am I, neither is anybody, right? Are you deserving of love and care? Absolutely, 100%. But when we get to this point where we're, you know, I'm good, like I don't need to do anything, then it's like, you know, being in the field, nobody would want, you know, you're talking about the health industry. Nobody wanted a doctor saying like, I'm done learning and you're going to get the best, you know, medical practice from 1985, even though it's 2021. You'd want them to, you know, continuously improve and get better. And it's the same thing with teaching, right? If we ever had a kid saying, you know what, I'm kind of good with math, I don't need to really know anymore, you'd be like, no, you're gonna grow. You're going to do this too. And like, I understand the intent of it too, but I think growth is actually what is, you know, when you talked about kind of thriving, you know, growth is one of the things that brings us, you know, happiness, is one of the brings that, you know, we find success in, is that even when you get stagnant, and, you know, you mentioned you're in your 30s and you said you get old. So it makes me like, I don't even know what generation I am. That's how old I am. I don't know what generation I am.
They weren't calling them names back then.
Yeah, exactly, right. It was like, I swear it was like boomers and then just jumped to millennials. I'm like, where am I in this fold, right? So, it is kind of like it is kind of seeing that, as you said, kind of that continuous improvement is a good thing. It's actually what keeps us, going, in the work that we actually do. I'm going to ask you. So, this is going to be, I think, this will be published in 2022. So when you're looking at people, coming out, I don't even know if say coming out of a pandemic, entering an endemic, I don't know, whatever the terminology is, right? So 2022, this year, what's like one piece of advice you'd give to people, to really kind of focus on, their own improvement, their own wealth, their health, their own well-being? What's one piece of advice that maybe you would give that maybe you're doing yourself, something that you could help people as they look to the new year?
I'd say stay present and present your story, right? Like, I think that there's something to understanding that maybe in the opposite way, like it's like present your story, like really get an understanding of like of who we are. Sounds easy, but I think that this is the time for things to be a little bit easier, right? Like I really feel as though that's another thing I've been looking to innovate on in my own self. Is like, where did I get this mentality? Like everything has to be hard. Like I get the idea that like hard things are good as well, but like what is also wrong with easy things? Like sometimes it's very easy for LeBron to beat another team. Like it's just like, I mean, we're just a lot better than them. Like it's like it doesn't mean you shouldn't have those things as well. Yes, the tough things also come. So I would say that, really come up with really craft, put our stories together, because from my research, it does a lot more for people than what they think they do from a holistic perspective. Like everything, and it kind of just like brings a lot of things in identity wise, and then from there, you can, like I said, be more just like present and understand that like, okay, well, this would make sense that this would be part of the journey, right? Like I said, when I was a kid, that I wanted to like innovate and help the world. Well, if there was no pandemics or like anything to deal with, like what story has ever not had those things that somebody ended up rising from the ashes? Like those are the stories I liked as a kid. So when we actually put those things in context, like I said, from that first piece of like really crafting our own story, we realized that we're probably exactly where we need to be. And then we can kind of like calm down, and you just have more in the zone moments. Again, not to want to belabor sports, but sports is education too. And so I would say that that's what I learned, is that like that present ability to be like, okay, like I played quarterback for a little bit. Again, like you said, it's kind of like your basketball days. It was short lived. But there were a few times where I'm like, okay, I can see how like me just throwing an interception, if I don't forget that quickly, right, it throws off the rest of the game. Like I have to realize that this is part of an entire situation. And if I'm still here and breathing, then what I'm agitated about, and again, what's throwing me off my equilibrium, there's something happening in Armenia. Something happened in Africa. Oh my gosh, the taxes. It's just like, yeah, everybody has something, right? Like, would I rather it have been like the Black Plague or the Great Depression or a war? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, but I know that people have dealt with it. So I'm going to also deal with it right now, today, in this present moment. So that's what I'd recommend in 2022.
So when you're talking about kind of being in the present, there's three shows or series that I connect with the pandemic that I watched. First one is Tiger King. I don't know if you watched that.
I haven't watched it, but I've seen it. Yeah.
I don't know.
Social media. I've seen it.
The other one is Eurovision with Will Ferrell, which was like a surprisingly good movie. I could not believe how my kids love it, actually. But the third one, I don't know if you saw it, but I would hope you saw it, The Last Dance. Did you watch the Jordan Last Dance?
Yeah, I did.
So good, right? And the one of my favorite parts, I think it's actually I've watched it probably 9-10 times now, like the whole series over and over again.
Right.
And I think it's either episode 9 or 10. And they were talking about, and I got to bring us back to basketball. They were talking about the one thing that separated Jordan from everyone else is what you just said, is his ability to be present.
It's the last episode. It's definitely the last episode. Right. He's like next to the piano. He's like Phil always says, you got to stay present, stay in the moment.
Right. And he actually, like, they're talking about like how many game winners he missed. And he's not thinking about that when he's taking the present game winner, right? And I think, you know, that as you kind of said, you know, nobody likes the "I've never had any issues and I continue not to have issues" story. It's the comeback story is the power. It's right. It's the overcoming adversity, right? I think those are the really powerful stories. So it was awesome connecting with you. I loved chatting with this. I'm telling you, man. If I'm in New York, we're going to the Knicks game. I'm in, man.
All right, sounds great.
I can talk basketball and not feel guilty about it the whole time, right?
No, I'm good. I'm good with that, man. Let me know.
All right. Okay. Well, hey, thanks everyone for listening. E, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day. I look forward to connecting with you more. People, if you want to connect with E, you'll see links to the social media and anything else down in the description. But thank you so much for listening. E, thanks again for being on. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too, George, man. Have a beautiful day.
Take care.
Take care.